Okay, here we go. So we're starting our first class in Tanya, Perek Yud Beis, Perek 12. I decided to start here because this is really the beginning of our journey with regards to the story of a Beinoni. We had all the introductions. We had the whole discussion about how the Nefesh Elokis works. That was chapters. Those were chapters 2 through 5. Nefesh Bahamias 6 through 8. Then we had war, right? That was chapter 9. That we have in our body the Nefesh Elokis fighting against Nefesh Bahamias. Then we have chapter 10 was the story of the Tzaddik. Chapter 11, the story of the Rasha. And now we finally made it to chapter 12, the Beinoni. This is what the book was written for. It was written for you and for me. Because as we're going to see, the Beinoni is very much a regular person. On the one hand, it seems like the impossible, but on the other hand, it's very possible. This is not a matter of, like we saw with regards to the tzaddik, a person who is coming from a very elevated place, an elevated state. This is a regular person doing incredible things. What are the incredible things that he's doing? What he's doing is that he is completely in control of himself in the three areas that he can control himself. Namely, number 1, thought, number 2, speech, and number 3, action. That and those are really the only 3 areas that I can control. How my intellect is going to look, how my emotions are going to be, what I look like, how I am, etc., etc., etc. That is something that's beyond me. These 3 areas, as we talked about in chapter 4, these are the garments of the soul. So these are things I could take and put them on or take them off. That's up to me. That's my area of control. As much as I'd like to control so many things, these 3 areas are the areas that I can control, and I can become Superman with these areas. Superman means being in control of yourself 24/7. It's an incredible thing. That's what a Beinoni looks like. But if you were to turn around and you were to take an X-ray, for example, and you look, thank you very much, and you looked at what does the Beinoni look like on the inside, the Beinoni and the Rasha, the Beinoni and quote-unquote the person who has not perfected himself at all, look identical in the inside. They have the same desires, they have the same Nefesh Bahamis that's driving them crazy for all different things. It's just the Beinoni learns how to win. That's the difference. Which is not the case when you're looking at a tzaddik. A tzaddik is a different story altogether. A tzaddik, if you took an x-ray of a tzaddik, what you would see is a godly soul that was on fire, that was huge, that was so overwhelming the Nefesh Bahamis, the animal soul, and the body, that it was beyond belief. The Nefesh Bahamis doesn't have a chance. So if you took that x-ray of the tzaddik, you look at it and you'd say, how can I ever get there? So the Alter Rebbe came along and told us that that is not the goal. We have to know what's the goal and what's not the goal. If I think the goal is that we want to change around our soul in such a way that all of a sudden our soul becomes something that is from some higher world, that's beyond us, as we're going to see at the end of chapter 14. It could be that God could give us a present and he will actually, so to speak, impregnate our soul with another soul. And in which case, I will have a very different vision of the world, a very different perspective. But that's not what we're counting on. What we're counting on is how I'm going to work with the tools that I have, my God-given tools. That's the story of the Beinoni, and that's why we decided to start with Perek Yud Beis, chapter 12. So let's start. Here he goes. The Beinoni is Shela Oilam Ein Hara Goiver Kol Kach Lichvoi Shesa'ir Ketana. The Beinoni is someone who the evil is not able to, so to speak, to such an extent to conquer the Ir Ketana. Remember, the Ir Ketana, we were introduced to this idea in chapter 9, the Ir Katana means a small city, but it means my body. Because remember, there's a war that's going on inside of me. My nefesh abahamis, my animal soul, has one agenda, and my nefesh elokis, my godly soul, has a different agenda. And they're facing off against each other all day long. So in the Beinoni, the evil of the animal soul, the self-centeredness, the egotism of the animal soul doesn't have the strength, so to speak, to conquer the city. Lihislabish beguf, to become enclosed in the body. Lahachtio, in order to cause it to sin. What does this mean? Dahainu. Whenever you have a dahainu, it means, okay, let me explain to you what I just said. Dahainu. Here it goes. Sheshloisha levushe nefesh abahamis, namely the three garments of the animal soul. Shehem machshava, dibur, meiser, which are the thought, speech, and action. Shemitzad haklipas, which are coming from the klipas, ein goivrin bo al nefesh alokis, are not able to win out over the nefesh alokis, the godly soul. Lehislabish beguf, to win out and to enclose itself within the body. B'mayach, in the brain, which implies thought. B'peh, in the mouth, which is the idea of speech. U b'shar, or the rest of the remach, evarim, the 248 limbs. Lahachtiyam, litamam, chas v'shalom, in order to cause him to sin and to make him impure. Meaning what? It's not that the nefesh abahami doesn't have power in him. He does have power in him. It's just that the nefesh alokis is strong enough to be in a winning situation that he never allows himself to let his guard down. He's always proactively making it happen in such a way that the godly soul is filling himself up with the godly garments. That's what's going on. That's how it's happening. So as much as the nefesh abahamius wants to trigger him in this way, in that way, to start having him think this thought, speak about that person, act in this way, the Beinoni is constantly on guard. The Beinoni constantly has the power to be able to not allow the nefesh abahamius to win, which is incredible. Rak shloisha levushe nefesh elokim, only the three garments of the nefesh elokis, heim levada mislabshim beguf, they are the only ones that are able to become enclosed within the body, sheheim machshava dibur ma'aser shel taryag mitzvahs v'hatayra, which are the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. And then he goes even a step further. V'lo avar avera miyamav, v'lo yavar le'olam. And it's like he never sinned before in his whole life, and he will never sin. Now that's a very strange comment. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nirah. What does it mean that he never sinned before? Does that mean that, look, most of us, I hate to break it to you, but does that mean that we're out of the, we're out of the race? We can never become a Beinoni. What it means is that by the Beinoni, he is so much put to rest the opportunities of the nefesh abahamius that it's going to be like, it's so bizarre, the concept that he could possibly sin. What do I mean by that? The Rebbe has in a letter that sometimes we look back at, for instance, maybe like a letter that we wrote when we were kids, or like a notebook that we had, or stuff like that. And you look inside of it, and you look at what's written, and you're like, who wrote that? Like, who drew that picture? That was me? Oh, come on. I'm like, I would never, I can't imagine it. In other words, you become like a different person. As we grow up, we become much more mature, hopefully. We're at least trying to be, right? And all of a sudden, it's like that person that wrote that essay or that paragraph or that picture, you can't identify with that person. Or for example, let's take a Baal Tshuva that maybe didn't grow up with that much knowledge of Yiddishkeit, and all of a sudden it comes to Yom Kippur. Now, many people in the world that are not, or wouldn't consider themselves religious, would never consider eating on Yom Kippur. So imagine this Baal Tshuva who has now become religious and he's very into it and everything like that. He keeps Shabbos and keeps kosher. You said to him, what do you think? Should we go out to eat? It's just, it's a regular Tuesday. Oh, it happens to be Yom Kippur. Whatever. He'd look at you like you're crazy. Would never think of it. Never be such a thing. That's the meaning here. This person who we're calling the Beinoni. Now, I want to point out, what we're saying here is he's going to be called the Madrega of the Beinoni, which means the level of the Beinoni. Right? Meaning that there are people that are out there that have reached such a level in life that they have become this type of person, that we could count on them forever. They're never going to go away from this holiness. On the other hand, we'll see later on when we get to chapter 14, the Alter Rebbe is going to introduce us to a different idea, which is known as the Midas HaBeinoni, which means that anyone at any moment could become a Beinoni. Not a Madrega, not the level of a Beinoni, but that they could take on the characteristics of a Beinoni. That's a possibility. Here we're talking about the Madrega of a Beinoni, the level of a Beinoni, someone who is... How many people do you think are out there that could say that they're like that? I don't know. Not many, I don't think. But the point being that what? Madregas HaBeinoni is someone who is completely on that level, that even though they may have made mistakes when they were younger, they're like a different person now. Right? That's what we're talking about here. Let's go further. V'lo nikra alav shem rasha afilu sha'achas v'rega echad. He would not be called a rasha even for one moment, for one instant, kol yamav, all the days of his life. However, having said that, he says, however, mahus v'atzmus nefesh alukis. However, the essence of the nefesh alukis. Now remember, in Tanya, when we're talking about mahus v'atzmus nefesh alukis, or nefesh bahamis for that matter, we're talking about the seichel and the midos, the 10 powers. That's what we're talking about, right? Because the focus in Tanya is constantly on the levushim, on the garments. We're working with our garments. We're changing our garments. We're constantly focusing on, that is the area that I need to work on, my thought, speech, and action. So in relation to my garments, the me is my seichel and my midos, my intellect and my emotions, my 10 powers. And that's what he says here. However, the essence of my nefesh alokis, which are the 10 levels, you cannot say that they have total control over the body. Because why? Because he's not a tzaddik. He's a Beinoni. Which means that the Nefesh HaBahamiyah still has a very strong place in the body itself. And notice he says the words Melucha v'Memshala. What does that mean? Melucha, of course, means kingship. Memshala means governing. But it means a Melucha is something that in Hasidic literature means that the subjects want it. They want the king. They want this type of rulership. A memshala means even against its will. So when we say here that not only doesn't it have a melucha on the body, meaning that the body is not openly accepting that only the nefesh alokis will be in control, but not even in a memshala, meaning that even against the will of the body, against the will of himself, it still doesn't have in control. Because the Nefesh HaBahamiyah still is very powerful inside of him. And that's why, like we said before, by the Beinoni, if you took an x-ray, and the Rasha, you took an x-ray, it would look the same. Unlike a tzaddik. And with this, the Alter Rebbe is trying to teach us something. We're going to conclude with this point. The Alter Rebbe is teaching us that this, as impossible as this may seem to all of us, that there could be a person that could be in control constantly over his actions, his speech, and his thought. Nevertheless, it is something within the reach of every single individual. Because we're not talking about changing the soul, we're not talking about changing the innards of the person, we're talking about changing the garments. And the garments, at the end of the day, each one of us have the potential to control. It's just that we have to make the right choices that will put us into the pathway of learning how to do it. And that's the point that we're talking about here. Okay, so that's the end of the first year from our new YouTube channel, and I hope that you all enjoy it, and you could hopefully subscribe and like and push the button of like.
See you next time.
See you next time.